Hey, welcome back. Alrighty, lecture 4 in chapter 1. You've just gone through the section in the textbook where they're talking about the different kinds of research. And I've known in the past that a lot of people have trouble kind of distinguishing between some of these. And so what I wanted to do in this part was to talk about that a little bit, just to go back over some of those different kinds of research, and then to really focus on one kind, the translational research. It seems to be the one that students are often most confused about. And I want to actually just do it with you. So I want to actually take some research data, some findings, some knowledge we have, and show you how that knowledge can help you with a real world situation you're in, which is learning online, which is difficult. So let's get there. But let's start here. Okay. So we're back to lecture 1 for translational research, learning effectively online. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so in the textbook, they kind of make these distinctions between these kinds of research, but they didn't do what I think is important, which is this distinction across the top. And I think that's often people got confused between translational and applied. And I think once you get this distinction in mind, this confusion disappears. Oops. So let me talk that through a little bit. So a lot of research, and a lot of times we think of research, we think that the goal is to find new knowledge, to discover new facts about the world, to learn more of these sort of, laws of nature kind of thing. And in fact, that is what a whole lot of research is focused on. And so if we start with that notion, is the goal of the research to discover new knowledge? Well, then there's two different sort of contexts almost in which that research happens. What we refer to as basic research, this almost always happens in a lab. Nowadays, I told you back in the day it was hobbies. These were labs people had in their basement. Nowadays, these labs tend to be in universities. And so a faculty member will often have their office, but separately they'll have a lab where they're doing their basic research. It also often involves creating contrived situations. You want to learn about something, but in order, as you'll learn in chapter 2, in order to really do great research, you want to create conditions that are very similar except for something you're interested in. How does adding this other thing change, for example, how people behave? So you want to create what are called tightly controlled situations where the only thing that changes is the variable you're interested in. And in a basic research context, that's often what they're doing. So they might be interested in some real world issue, like human memory and how it works or something, but then they create a context that's very specific. So I'm going to present words to participants at 2 seconds a word. And so they come up with a very specific procedure that allows them to identify the impact of certain variables in very precise, and I'm going to use this word because you're going to get to know it, causal ways. What does that, if that variable is present, does that change behavior? And if it does, that means this variable is causing the change. Okay, so basic research is often looking for these causal relationships. What variables affect the behavior that I'm looking at? And often to really get at that well, you need to strip things down and create this sort of artificial situation. And so it's very strong. It provides very strong experimental control. What it sometimes lacks is something we call external validity. It becomes such a purified version of whatever you're looking at that people sometimes say, okay, that worked in the lab, but would that really work in the real world? Did you make such an odd artificial situation that it doesn't even apply anymore? And if that's true, then we say it lacks external validity. So it may have a lot of what we call internal validity. The experiment itself may be great and it was conducted really well, but do the results actually mean anything in the real world? Okay, so that's the basic research context. Now, applied research occurs in the real world. So it is often research where, let's say somebody was interested. We're going to be talking about learning today. So let's say somebody was interested in learning. So they could do basic research and they could bring students into a lab and say, hey, please read this chapter as though it were important to you. And in basic research, you're always worried, are they really reading it like they would in the real world? Well, maybe we want to do the experiment in the real world. Maybe we want to look at students' memory for chapters they have actually read in the context of a course that they care about learning, right? And so when we go into the real world, we get reality, which is great. We know that the thing we're interested in is learning in a classroom. And so if we're studying that in a classroom, we're studying that thing we really care about. We didn't have to distill it down or purify it or whatever. It is what we're interested in. But the expense, as I say here, is sometimes experimental control. Sometimes that real world context doesn't allow you to control all of these other variables you'd like to control. And so then sometimes when you see some result, first of all, it's relevant to the real world because you found it in the real world. So you have that external validity, but sometimes you're a little worried about whether you can really draw the conclusions you want. Might there have been something else going on because I couldn't control everything? Okay, so that's sort of where these two lie. A lot of experimental control in basic research, potential worries about external validity. A lot of external validity in applied research, potential worries about internal validity, experimental control. And so you got to kind of find, different researchers land on different sides. A lot of researchers are basic researchers, but some feel like they want to work on something real. And a lot of my research is applied research on education. Educational psychology is my primary form of research. And so some of the research I do, and you'll see some of this happen in the class that you're in, is research that happens in the context of real-world classes and is interested in gaining new knowledge up here. Okay, cool. So where does this translational thing sneak in? Well, here's the critical distinction to get. The research is focused on applying existing knowledge. So it's not about gaining new knowledge. It's like, hey, we already know something about things. I'll be more specific in just a moment with my example. That knowledge that we have, could that be useful to people? Can we bring that knowledge out of the lab and into the real world where it's useful? Can we translate it from the lab to the real world? And again, it's not because we want to gain knowledge in that real world. It's that we actually want to use the knowledge that we have to some benefit of somebody. Okay, so that sounds kind of vague. But let's talk about this notion of, helping students learn effectively online. This was an issue before the pandemic, but certainly during the pandemic. Suddenly, all these students were learning online, and you guys were there, and found it to be really tough. Is there anything we know from psychology that we could use to help these students, to advise these students? That would be translational. Let me take you there. Okay, and let's just have a taste of this so you can really feel what translational research could look like. To learn effectively online, you have to first of all understand that there are two villains. I got the Disney villains here just to show a bunch of villains, but there are two things that stand in your way, and they are procrastination and distraction. You have to first of all get around to actually doing the work. And then once you start doing the work, you want to focus on that work. You don't want to be pulled away all the time. But we know it can be very hard to just start doing something. Procrastination can be a tough villain. And we also know that once we do start doing something, it's very easy for us to get distracted. And then, you can't learn if you don't start, or if you don't focus once you start. So you have to kind of understand these a little better and try to think about, okay, how can I take them on? How can I not just let them have their way with me? I want to be in control of my own learning. I don't want these villains to come and hijack my learning opportunity. So hence the translational part. Let's start with procrastination. I thought this graphic was kind of funny. Things I should do, things I would like to do, things I do when I'm procrastinating. I don't know if this is true of you guys, but my favorite example is when I had to write my PhD. Oh my goodness, it was stressful to write that PhD. I would do anything else. I would clean the oven. I would, clean my whole apartment. I would do anything that usually would seem horrible, but relative to doing the PhD, it was procrastination. It was just an excuse to not do the PhD, right? And so this is a problem. We sometimes have things we know we need to do, and we just can't seem to get to it. I like this definition: the action of ruining your life for no apparent reason. And that's often like we'll sit there and think, why don't we just freaking do it? Okay, how can we help? Well, let me tell you a little bit of a story. It's a story about a researcher named Bluma Zygarnik. You don't know the whole history of psychology yet. You're going to learn about a bunch of characters, and one of the very important characters you'll learn about is somebody named Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist. Actually, we think of him as a psychologist now, but he didn't think of himself as a psychologist. He thought of himself as a physiologist studying digestion. You'll learn all about Pavlovian conditioning. We'll get there. Bluma was Ivan Pavlov's student. So she was a student of Pavlov, and she discovered something really interesting. And that is the power of unfinished business. The story goes a little bit like this, that it started in a restaurant where she was out with colleagues, and the colleagues were talking about memory, and they noted that waiters or waitresses, when they're serving you, they remember all the details of your order really well until you pay for it. Once you pay for your food, all of those details just disappear. And they thought, that's kind of interesting. How does that work? What's going on there? And so Bluma was there, and she thought, well, I'm going to do research on this. This sounds like a fascinating thing. And so this is what Zygarnik did. She had people come into a lab. She had them do a bunch of tasks, say about 16 or 20 different tasks. They were simple things like solving a puzzle or doing a little word game or, whatever, 12 or 16 or 20 things like that. Here's the interesting thing. For half of them, she interrupted the participant before they could complete the task. So half of them, she allowed them to complete the task before moving on. But for the other half, she said, oh, that's long enough. That's okay. Let's just stop here and let's move on to the next task. And so half of them were completed, half of them were not. She then connected with the participants a little later, and she said, hey, remember when I had you in the lab doing those tasks? What do you remember? What tasks did I ask you to do? And she said, or what she found is that people really remembered the tasks that they were not allowed to complete, the unfinished business. The ones they were allowed to complete seemed to just kind of disappear, but the unfinished business stuck around. You know this effect. You don't know it maybe as the Zygarnik effect. You probably know the term cliffhanger. Your favorite Netflix binging thing or whatever. What do they do at the end of almost every season? Think Stranger Things, think whatever. They end with something exciting, some sort of cliffhanger, some sort of unfinished business. Right? So there's something that you want to know how it ends. There's something you want to know what happens next. And why do they do that? Because just like Zygarnik found, if they don't complete it, if they don't finish it, you're going to continue to think about it. And that's what Zygarnik's participant said. Not only do I remember those tasks better, I think of them now and then. They come to mind. It's like when I didn't finish it, it keeps coming to mind and I keep thinking about it. They use this in the news. They use this on the radio. What do you think? What's the number one thing on students' mind these days? Come back and we'll tell you after the break. Unfinished business. And so they know in the entertainment industry that unfinished business will bring people back. We use the Zygarnik effect all the time. And it's known as the best way to combat procrastination. Okay, so let's just think the translational thing. Zygarnik did this research in her lab. And now what I'm going to do is tell you how you can harness the power of that research to be a better student. That's the translational part. Okay. And so we would say things like this. Here's just two recommendations that come from the Zeigarnik effect. One seems really odd. I encourage you to try it though. So with procrastination, the first step never gets done. You keep putting it off. To put the Zeigarnik effect into action, all you have to do is make that first step. All it takes is sitting down and making a plan, writing a sentence, or opening a book. The claim here is once you do that, you now have unfinished business. Okay, if you never sit down, if you never crack open that textbook, if you never whatever, it's not really unfinished business because it's not been started. But once you start it, it's now unfinished business, and you will now have the wind of the Zeigarnik effect at your back. You will have this desire to finish what you started. Okay, once you've started a task, you will crave closure. Finding the motivation to do so may be difficult, but making the conscious decision to start will make finishing the task impossible to avoid. So don't worry about the whole task. Don't worry about how hard it'll be to do all that. Just say, I'm just going to sit my butt in a chair and start. That's the first thing. And that gets the Zeigarnik effect in play. Okay, now here's the really weird one. When do you stop your sort of study session or your whatever? We all would naturally do what Zeigarnik would say is the wrong thing. We would complete the chapter. We would get to some point where we feel like, okay, I've completed something. Cool. I'll stop now. It feels like the psychologically comfortable place to start. And that's the problem. You actually don't want to stop in a comfortable place. You want to stop in an unfinished business place. So plan a study session with proper breaks, but don't finish the task before you leave it. Give yourself a question left unanswered, and you'll want to come back to it. So the idea here is, like, let's say you were reading the textbook. And let's say your goal is to read chapter 1. There would be sort of two recommendations here. One is, well, don't read all of chapter 1. Read most of chapter 1. But then that's going to make you want to come back and finish it. But then when you come back and finish it, don't just finish it and then get into chapter 2. And then, when you're into chapter 2, sort of partway there, then you can leave with unfinished business on the table. It won't feel natural to leave. You'll want to complete that. That's the whole point. You want to complete that. So if you walk away when it's unfinished, it will be on your mind and it will pull you back. And it will help you get your butt back down again, which brings you back to point 1. Okay? Fantastic. Let's keep that in our back pocket, the Zeigarnik effect and how to use it. Right? And that's what translational research really is. How can I use the knowledge we've gained from research for some other purpose that's important to me? Learning your course as well. Okay, let's do another example that's related to this. I love this example because you guys are all learning online. So why not give you these tips now when it's relevant, right? So what about distraction? The Zeigarnik effect is all about getting your butt there in front of the learning material, but you know what happens then, right? Mind your monkey. I always kind of like this. Come to recognize your instant gratification monkey. This is a funny concept. I kind of liked it. And commit to controlling it. So read what the monkey's little say. So let's start over here first of all. So the notion is there's you, and you should be at the wheel of your mind. You should be controlling what you're thinking about. But over here is this little instant gratification monkey. And you give this monkey a chance, and it will take the wheel from your hands. Okay? So you get things like this. Hey, let's watch a bunch of YouTube videos on creatures of the deep sea and then go on a YouTube spiral that takes us through Richard Feynman talking about string theory and ends with us watching interviews with Justin Bieber's mom. That's what happens to us, right? When something grabs our attention and suddenly we start going away from where we want to go. We get caught by all of these things. So something grabs your attention. Let's talk about some research on attention. So we're going to go to the lab here. Right? We know a lot about attention. In fact, we know that there are two distinct ways in which attention is controlled. There are what we call top-down, goal-directed, endogenous, or bottom-up, ambient, exogenous. You're going to learn a lot about this in a subsequent chapter, but I'm going to tell you enough now to get the translational stuff. So the idea here is you can every now and then control your attention. I can say to myself, hey, check to make sure there's nobody in my driveway right now. And then I can look and go, Yeah, nobody's in my driveway right now. And so now I've directed my attention through a conscious goal. So it's goal directed. And so this is you studying and saying, I want to read chapter 1, right? And so you start and you are in control of your attention. Here's your instant gratification monkey down here. Our mind, we have evolved with a mind that is worried about danger, worried about threat, and will constantly pull our attention towards anything that's threatening or interesting. One of the things that signals threat is a sudden onset of something. So something just appearing out of nowhere, right? And you think back in the days of our evolution, that was the sort of predator thing, right? We might be out gathering berries and then suddenly we either hear a predator or we see a predator step out. And so where there was nothing, there's the sound of a predator or the sight of a predator. There's an onset of stimulation. And our mind, when something just suddenly appears or a sound suddenly sounds, our mind is pulled to that naturally. It's not our goal. It's not our conscious mind. It's a very natural, instinctual thing. And so it's sometimes called ambient attention, exogenous attention, etc. And this is the instant gratification monkey. This is, we see something just appears and we see something over there. Well, what do we mean something appears? Let's talk about your internet addiction for a moment here. And I know you have one because we all have one. And these devices, both of them really, have been programmed to be the ultimate distraction machines. Imagine when you have notifications on. What did I just tell you? The sudden onset of something grabs your attention. Well, what's a notification? It's usually your phone vibrating, something popping up, and a sound maybe going bing. 3 onsets of a feeling, the vibration, of a visual thing, and of a sound. Wow, is that going to pull your attention? Right? Our mind is like, oh, there's something going on over there. I better check it. I better see what's going on. And that's what our phones constantly do. So we're sitting there trying to do our goal-directed attention thing, but anything that could pull us away will, in a very automatic and powerful way. This is the villain of distraction. Okay, but we now understand. I've told you a little bit what we know about attention, what research has shown us about attention. And one of the things it's shown us is that, hey, these distractors, these things that onset will naturally grab us. There is nothing we can do to really fight that aside from not letting it happen in the first place. And that's where we get to the translational advice. When you are sitting down to learn. So a couple of points first of all, create an area you use only for learning. We could talk about classical conditioning and stuff. I won't get into that, but let me make the point here, and I'll just make it with a simple example. If you're the kind of person that sits on, maybe right now, you are watching me on your computer, which is on your lap, while you are in your bed or on your bed. You shouldn't do that. Beds are made for sleeping. Your body and your mind starts to associate the bed with sleep and with being tired and such. If you bring your computer onto the bed with you, one of 2 things will happen. One is you will drift off because that's what you do in bed. And so it's going to be very hard to sustain your goal-directed attention. Or worse yet, you will start to associate your bed with active thought, the kind of things you're doing when you're studying. And then when you try to sleep in that bed, you won't be able to sleep as well. Your mind will go into active thought. So you want to separate. You want to say, no, bed is for relaxation. Don't bring your cell phone to bed. Don't bring your tech to bed. Nothing like that. Your bed should be about relaxation and sleep. And if you make it that, then it will work well. When you lay down in bed, you will naturally fall asleep. And you should have another space that's only for your learning. And when you go into that space, it's about active thought, active mindset. And that's what your mind will start to pair with that space. So the moment you sit there, it'll be like, okay, let's think. Let's do stuff. Now, the monkey. Do not bring your cell phone with you. I joke with students every now and then. I like to say, these things, they have a button. Where is it? Over here. They have a button over here. It's an on and off button. You can turn your phone off. Do you know that? Have you ever done it? You should learn. Because when you're studying, probably the single best thing you can do to fight distraction is turn your phone off. Have no notifications coming through, right? Certainly do not allow notifications to pop up on the computer that you're using to study, right? If you have your notifications popping up there, well, that's right where you're looking, and it's going to pull your attention right away as soon as something pops up. Also, do not open up any social media on your computer. So when just like we have the space just for studying, when you are studying, whatever materials you bring with you should be restricted to what you're using to study. Don't have any other windows open that could pull you towards something else. Just focus on the study. If necessary, use noise-canceling headphones to provide peace and avoid your attention being pulled away by your environment, right? Maybe you have family members that are poking around and doing stuff, and if they make a loud noise, that's going to grab your attention. Noise-canceling headphones, you're in your own world. You're free of those distractions. And then just sit down in this space and start learning. And then the Zeigarnik effect will kick in. And the important thing is the Zeigarnik effect will start to push you along through the learning, and nothing will pull you away from it. Okay? All right. So the larger points here are with respect to translational learning in general. And the larger point is that we know these things about attention. We know these things about like the Zeigarnik effect, about motivation and how to keep people motivated. We've learned about these things from research we've done in the lab. And now we see that the stuff we learned could be valuable to somebody in the real world, students doing online learning. And so what we're going to do is bring that research to them and let them know how they can use that to most effectively, in this case, learn. That is called translational research. And I spend a lot of time myself doing translational research as well. And you'll see that in throughout the course. You'll see some examples. Okay, so I hope that kind of clarifies a little bit what translational research is about and how it's different from applied research, where applied research is about getting new information, getting new knowledge, whereas translational research is really about using the knowledge we have. Cool. Back at it. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.